Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Novick from the Office of Sustainability here at Notre Dame, and it's a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Mike Keene is Professor of Sociology and the founding director of the Center for a Sustainable Future at IU South Bend, which has been a focus of much collaboration among researchers, private citizens, corporations, and the civic community, as well as farmers, food distributors, and governmental policymakers in this region. Dr. Keene received both his master's and doctoral degrees from Notre Dame and has played an active role in the City of South Bend's efforts to become more efficient and sustainable. Dr. Keene has been the recipient of numerous distinctions, including the 2011 Innovatus Award for Outstanding Contributions to Sustainability, the IUSB Eldon Lundquist Award, the IU Trustees Teaching Award, the IUSB Chancellor's Fellowship, and the IU President's Award for Distinguished Teaching. His areas of specialization include sustainability studies, environment and society, urban society, classical and postmodern theory, qualitative research methods, and a history of science and sociology. He teaches Foundations of Sustainability and the Sustainability Practicum, and is currently doing research on sustainability and the social condition. Please join me in welcoming Mike Keene.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'll try, I'd like to be able to walk around, so I've got a clip on here. I want to thank Jessica and Robin and Rachel and the entire team for putting together this climate conference and for inviting me to come and speak at it. I remember the first time I was in this room was for the inaugural lecture for the Archbishop Oscar Romero lecture series that is delivered here. I want to start by noting two things that relate to some of the earlier speakers today. Number one, like Andy, my entry to what is now sustainability came through nuclear winter. When I was here at Notre Dame, I was asked to be the graduate assistant for a class called The Nuclear Dilemma that Father Hesburgh asked an endowed chair by the name of Dennis Goulet to teach. I took that course to IU South Bend called The Nuclear Dilemma, but in 1989 the wall came down and all of a sudden I had a whole course that nobody was interested in. But I had one chapter called Nuclear Winter, and in beginning to look at that I began to recognize that the nuclear winter was just a part of a much larger issue, and that was the issue of the relationship between environment and society. So I spent the next 8 or 10 years teaching a class called Environment Society, but then recognized there was a missing part to that too, and that is this idea of economy, and started to focus on sustainability. For the last 5 or 6 years, that's kind of what I've been focusing on. The other thing I want to suggest is I'm an optimist. I'm not a pessimist when it takes a look in the future. Now, I have to give a caveat about that, and that is to suggest a quote by David Orr, who said that he has what's called a millennial hope. That is, that his hope is not something that's going to happen in the next quarter, but will happen perhaps in the next millennia. And with that sense, I'm very optimistic, and the reason I'm optimistic is because of the people who have been on this stage during this conference, the information they brought to it. Even more so because of those of you who are in the audience. And even more than that, because right now, at this moment, within 30 miles from here, I know over 20 people who are making a difference and are bringing about a sustainable future. Somebody like Boniface Junga, he is working with kids here in the Boys and Girls Club to put together little kits that put in a small solar panel with a little LED light and a small stem. They send them over to Kenya. Kids over there assemble these things, take a used 2-liter plastic bottle, put that on there, and they have light so they don't have to go to the airport and read their homework. Or Sarah Stewart, who 5 years ago had a piece of property in South Bend and said, I'll create a garden and let anybody come and use it, and now we have 50 5 years later. Or Willow Weatherall, who was in the audience earlier today, who thought we can get people to come and listen to us talk about ideas. And 2 weeks ago at Ignite South Bend or Ignite Michiana, she had 400 people who paid $10 to come down and listen to folks talk about sustainability and innovation in an unrenovated theater. That's what's going to make a difference. And so that gives me a lot of hope. We all recognize what we've been talking about, climate change, climate crisis, is really one of our greatest challenges. but I also think it's one of our greatest opportunities. And I think it's a terrific opportunity for higher education and the academy if we are able to figure out how we want to respond. Clearly, there's a lot of serious issues. I mean, as an optimistic, I'm not naive, and I'm not Pollyannish. If we take a look at the issues that we're going to be facing us as a result of things related to climate change and global warming, we're going to be facing, and already are, issues of energy, water shortages, climate changes, resilience and adaptation, food, pollution and disease, poverty, racial and ethnic tensions, resource shortages. In the last couple of years, the report that the CIA gives to the President on an annual basis has identified resource shortages and climate issues and mass migration as perhaps one of the greatest threats we're going to see to national security. Along with some of the challenges that we've had, this might be along with some of the challenges, I'm going to move over here because this seems to be. All right. Is this better? Is that better? Whoa. Whoa. Okay. There we don't have the thing. The erosion of trust that we've been seeing happening too, and that's happening for a variety of reasons, not only because of our inability to respond to some of these great challenges, but probably some of the transparency issues of an information society. The way we can respond is as an academy is through the components of our academic mission. The typical academic mission is divided into these three areas. Those of you who are faculty members, this is what we report on every year, right? Our teaching, our research, and our service. We tend to want to redefine this as teaching and learning, so we can think about student-centered learning, research and creative activity, so we don't leave our friends in the arts out, and service and civic engagement, so it means more than serving on that committee that you don't like to show up for, but actually engaging beyond the campus. And it's really going to be through these three elements of our mission that we're going to have to figure out how can we respond to the challenges of sustainability. Because as business, government, not-for-profit, and civil sector are challenged and looking for answers or looking ways to respond to these issues that are being raised by climate change, they're looking to the universities and the colleges as one of the places to answer that. And quite frankly, our ability to respond adequately and help society respond to this issue, I think is going to have a terrific impact on our status within society going forward. And right now, certainly those of us who work in public institutions, that has been at challenge. When we're talking about sustainability, all of you know this definition. This is a wonderful sentiment, but the problem is how do you act upon this? How do you research upon this? How do you teach upon this? How do you serve upon this? It's too loosey-goosey and abstract. It's a great sentiment, but we need to get something that we can stand upon in these areas. So we can begin to sort of pull this apart or begin to dig down by taking a look at and recognizing the triple bottom line, which we all know is sort of the foundation of sustainability. It's about people, prosperity, and planet. Or it's about the economy pooched within society, pooched within the environment. And the whole idea of sustainability is try to figure out how can we bring these three things into harmony. So one way of thinking about the challenge of the academy and the opportunity that's offered to us is to recognize that what we need to figure out how to do is how to bring these two diagrams together, how to integrate economy, society, environment with teaching, research, and service. Now, in order to do that, we're probably going to have to figure out some set of shared definitions or frameworks that we can agree upon that will allow us to collaborate or work together. Because of the complexity and uncertainty of what we're doing, and because we're in the academy, we need an evidence-based platform. It's not enough for us to say, oh, here's a set of 10 things that you can do, or here's a sentiment. What we need is something that's going to give us a scientific-based foundation for talking about these are the kinds of things that we need to do if we want to move towards a more sustainable future. One framework, and this is not the only one, but one framework that we've found very useful is called the Framework for Strategic Sustainable Development. developed by a group called the Natural Step. I am not working in any of the Natural Step offices, but our center, my Center for Sustainable Future, we are a strategic partner with the Natural Step, and we've been working with them for the last 4 or 5 years. The Natural Step is a framework that was developed beginning about 25 years ago in an attempt to find a set of principles that will help to guide us to a sustainable path regardless of where we're starting. It's non-prescriptive. It doesn't tell anybody what to do. It gives some basic principles, and you've got to figure out what to do in your own context. It's non-judgmental. It doesn't say, oh, you're doing a good job, or oh, you're doing a bad job. Being a sustainability professional is kind of like being a doctor. You walk into a room and everybody comes up and starts sort of confessing to you or bragging, right? Oh, Mike, you know, I drank from a unrecycled water bottle the other day. Or, oh, Mike, we recycle. That's the last thing I want to hear, right? I don't care what you're doing or what you're not doing. It's not the last thing you did. It's the next thing you're going to do. And this is about figuring out what you can do and how you can do it. It's a flexible framework. It has a natural and social science platform. It takes an integrated, holistic approach, and it allows people to sort of create and implement their own plans. And we found that this framework actually is a terrific platform for carrying out the tripartite mission of an academic unit. The person who first started getting this going was a cancer soil scientist by the name of Karl Henrik Robert. He was really a cutting-edge researcher trying to figure out, you know, what's causing those cells to go cancerous. But he also was kind of into nature and interested in this thing he was hearing about, this buzzword, sustainability. He started hearing people talk about it in the 1990s. And he said to his colleagues, well, what is sustainability? And they said, well, sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And he said, yeah, I know that, but I want a scientific definition, one that has evidence, one that I can do research upon. And so he went to some other colleagues and he said, listen, you know, I've heard about this thing called sustainability. Can you tell me a scientific definition? They said, yeah, it's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So he couldn't find a satisfactory definition, and so he figured, you know what? I'm going to try to see if I can find one myself and with my colleagues. So he set out. And he figured, well, how am I going to start? And he said, well, I will start by trying to figure out what it is that I know. I'm going to start from where I'm at. I'm going to take a look at a single cell and think about this single cell. And he thought to himself, if I can figure out what allowed this single cell to emerge and what allows it to sustain itself, then maybe from that we can get some basic conditions of sustainability that will have a scientific foundation that we can then begin to act upon, to evaluate, to research. So he looked to the basic laws of physics. You know, what was interesting about this is, you know, here's a guy who spent all his life trying to push the edges of science to the edge. Here, that's not what he was doing. Here he was saying, let's see if we can find out what science agree upon. Not necessarily new knowledge, but accepted knowledge. Can we take a look at what we already know and use this to create this platform? So the first and second laws of thermodynamics, the laws of the conservation of matter. He also took a look at evolutionary biology and what we've learned there about the evolution of species, plants, animals, human ancestors. He took a look at the planetary cycles, what's happening in terms of these various cycles that have all developed and allow us to have this situation where, in fact, a planet does emerge. The toxins and other things that wouldn't allow that cell to emerge get sequestered in the planet's core. These systems begin to develop among one and each other, and we get this balance where everything is sort of working together. And what he came up with is some things that scientists agree upon. One of the things that scientists agree upon is that we live on a biosphere that's relatively thin. If you want an example, you can sort of think about it's comparable to the skin of an onion or the height of a basketball. That's kind of the biosphere that most of our life is being supported on. And it's relatively fragile, and it works in cycles. It's an open system with respect to energy. That means this thing would be running down, just like your grandfather's clock would have, or the clock, the watches we used to have when we winded them. Now, you know, it's got a battery, or if you're echo, it's motion again, or maybe solar. So the sun comes in from outside the system, but it's closed with respect to matter. Basically, what we have is what we have. It's not going anywhere. It might be changing forms. Occasionally, you know, a meteor perhaps comes through, or we send some space junk out. But for most purposes, we've got what we've got, which means, quite frankly, that there is no way. A lot of times we think when we take a piece of paper or something, we toss it in a wastebasket, we threw it away. We didn't throw it away, we just moved it, and that's part of the problem. We've just been moving a lot of stuff from the Earth's core into landfills, and that's causing us some trouble. Photosynthesis pays the bills. That's what allows this thing to continue to operate and keeps those cycles and the balance working. And basically, there's this slow process where we've been having minerals, metals, and fossil fuels slowly coming up over time from the lithosphere and slowly going back into it in slow cycles. And this is kind of the balance system that we work on. And as I say, none of this is particularly world-shaking. This is accepted science. But it gives us the foundation to understand and think about how we're influencing the planet and how we might begin to transform that influence. Because now we can begin to think about, well, what is our influence on the system? That's the system if it's in balance. How do we influence that system? Well, one of the ways we influence that system is we are bringing up materials from the Earth's crust at a rate that's much faster than it can reabsorb them. If you kind of think about it, since the Industrial Revolution, we've become a counter-evolutionary force. Until that time, the Earth was sequestering these toxins and taking these heavy metals and these minerals back into the Earth, the carbon. And then it would release them slowly through things like volcanoes, earthquakes, and other sorts of things like that. But now we're putting them at a rate way, way faster, much faster than either the biosphere or the atmosphere can absorb more or less the lithosphere. We've also introduced a whole series of compounds that are foreign to nature that are made by society. Some of them are incredibly persistent, can last tens of thousands of years. Others are highly toxic, can never be reabsorbed back into nature. And that's having an impact on the balance of that system as well. We have had a huge impact on nature itself, degrading nature's services. One of the things I like to do, and I guess I'll ask you all to do it here, a silly little exercise. If you just humor me, close your eyes, and take a deep breath and hold it. Count to 6, and then let it out over a count of 6. Now, first of all, I've just told you a basic stress-releasing exercise. This is a great way if you have anxiety issues. Do it 10 times, and it'll help you a lot. The other thing that I've just done is, how much did that breath cost you? How much is the rain that's been falling here costing you? Except for those of you who can't get back to Chicago. It's free. These are what we call ecosystem services, right? And we depend on these things. And we don't pay for them. They're part of the commons. But if we can't figure out a way to maintain a balance, we're going to find that we're going to start to put those ecosystem services into challenge. Cutting down the rainforest or our own forest, right? It's kind of like we kind of depend on the folks down in Latin America to keep our lungs going because we cut the lungs down up here. Now we say, you guys can't do it. I think they should rent them to us. But what about the water? What about the soil? What about the atmosphere? These are all things that we're having an impact on, and we don't want to destroy these ecosystem services. It's kind of like thinking that this is our natural capital. And just like financial capital, if you eat up the capital, you live beyond your means, i.e. you live beyond the interest, you're going to have some serious problems. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Finally, through our actions, we often put barriers up to people meeting their own basic needs worldwide. And so when we think about this framework for strategic sustainable development, what you can see is there are 3 sort of environmental planks. Materials from the Earth's core, materials foreign to nature, degradation of nature, and then more social plank. That is, the impact we're having on people's capacities to meet their own needs. So based on that information, Carl Robert, they sent these papers around to their colleagues, first to about 20, then to all the scientists in Sweden, then to scientists around the world. And after about 20 drafts, they came up with this set of 4 system conditions that they felt pretty confident that they had a scientific platform that they could say, these are 4 system conditions for a sustainable society, sustainable development. In a sustainable society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing concentrations of substances extracted from the Earth's crust. Why not? Because we saw that in order for that cell to emerge and sustain itself, we had to have the Big Bang, a planet form, all those toxic gases, heavy metals and stuff, sequestered into the planet, and then over time a balance created that allowed the cells to emerge and sustain themselves. If we start bringing that stuff back up from where it was sequestered faster than it can be reabsorbed in a systematically increasing nature, we are eventually going to overburden the system's ability to provide us with those ecosystem services. The same thing with concentrations of substances produced by society. Until the 1930s or 40s, we were largely a wind, water, and wool society. We would have been able to take everything in this room, including what we're wearing, and either reuse it or put it on a compost pile. Right now, we probably can't do that, although some of our buildings are getting there, right? You've got some LEED Silver and some other buildings here. We're starting to move back towards that. Degradation by physical means. We're cutting down the rainforests, paving over the fertile soils, using up the water tables, even in this area, faster than we can know. With the rain above, we might not think that, but water is a significant issue for us and will become even more so in 15 years. And finally, in that society, people are not subject to conditions that systematically undermine their capacity to meet their needs. So the suggestion is that this is a framework that gives us a scientific platform. And what I find interesting about this is, first of all, it's not prescriptive. I like that. It's not judgmental. If you go and teach somebody this, or somebody asks you to come in and help me become sustainable, you don't say, recycle this, don't use that. You say, these are the principles. You figure out in your situation what you can do one step at a time. And the other idea is you start with the low-hanging fruit, and you build upon that over time. It's not going to happen overnight. What we can do with those conditions then is we can take a look at our current situation and see that it's an unsustainable one, and we're heading towards, if not already, in a bit of a world of hurt. The problem we've got, on the one hand, is that we've got increasing demand for resources and ecosystem services as we ourselves have become more affluent and more useful, one might say wasteful, although I don't want to be judgmental. And as others begin to look around and say, gosh, you know, we would like to be using what everybody else is using, and as the population of the planet grows. Just one thing to keep in mind, the ecological imprint of a new person that's born into America is about 20 times that of one born into India. So when we talk about population issues, we need to think about, you know, where it's happening and how it's being distributed. But the problem is because of that increasing demand, we see that there's a decreasing amount of those very same resources and ecosystem services. So that's why we use the metaphor of a funnel, because what's happening is the funnel is closing on us, and you can think of the sort of axis here as our room for maneuver. And as we have less and less resources, more and more demand, we have less and less room for maneuver, both environmentally, socially, and economically, to respond to the basic task of meeting human needs. And what we need to do is we need to open up those funnels so that we can go back to the point where we stop sort of closing down our options and opportunities and begin to move towards greater opportunities and greater sustainability. Eventually, and fortunately some people are beginning to talk about this, we're going to be moving, we hope, to not just a sustainable future, but a regenerative future, one in which we restore and regenerate the systems that we're a part of. How are we going to do it? Through the same thing that got us here. Think about what got us here. What got us here was the scientific and industrial revolutions and our own creative ability to innovate and shape the world. Now, a lot of times one could say, oh my God, look what these humans did to the planet. They crapped it up with the Industrial Revolution, and we're better off without them. But you know what I say? I say step back for a minute and think about the wonder of that. The wonder of a species who has evolved to a point where it can think, communicate, and impact the world in such a way that it literally can affect the planet. To me, that is wondrous. The fact that we did it without paying attention to the what we might call collateral damage, for use of a better word, that's a problem. But let's not forget that wonder, because it's going to be that same innovation and that same creativity that can allow us, in some sense, to repair the damage done by the Industrial Revolution by creating a sustainability revolution. But in this time, harnessing that creativity and that innovation to the lessons of nature and the principles of sustainability. So, from this set of system conditions, we can develop what we refer to as our operating manual for the planet. It's basically 4 simple principles or objectives that are based on these system conditions. If we're in a situation where one of the conditions of a sustainable society or a sustainable future is that we cannot continue to systematically accumulate materials taken from the Earth's crust, then obviously what we need to do is we begin to need to reduce and eventually eliminate our contributions to the systematic accumulation of materials taken from the Earth's crust. Now, does that mean that, okay, that's fossil fuels, that's metals, and that's minerals? Does that mean, okay, we stop fossil fuels overnight? I got to be in Indianapolis tonight at 6. I'm not getting there if that's what we're doing. And it's going to be cold tonight, or maybe not tonight. The weather's kind of warm. Point is, what we've got to do is we've got to start one step at a time. And what we've got to do is, first of all, in anything we do with sustainability, is also go for the efficiencies. First thing you do, don't think about the solar panels and the windmills. We can get there. Let's go for the efficiencies. So move from inefficient use to efficient use, from dissipative use to tight technical cycles. That is, let's close the loop, and if we're going to use a material, let's recover it at the end. Let's put the organic materials back into nature. Let's take the technical nutrients and put them back into the manufacturing stream. If we're going to use, we want to try to move from scarce metals to abundant metals. These wonderful things we have called cell phones right now, they allow wonderful communication, but can we find a way, can we innovate ourselves to a way where we don't need rare earths for them? What other ways can we do these sorts of things? Computing. From fossil fuels to renewable fuels. Again, overnight, no. Over time, yes. Second, same principle. If a problem is we're bringing and putting these substances foreign to nature into the lithosphere and the atmosphere, into our biosphere faster than they can be reabsorbed, sometimes they can't, then we need to, again, move from inefficient use to efficient use, persistent and natural compounds. Let's try to figure out how to use ones that are abundant and break down more easily, from dissipative use to tight technical cycles. Again, if we have to use some of this stuff, let's make sure that when we're done, we just don't let it go out into nature, but we recapture it and put it back into the use stream. We have some tens of thousands of chemical compounds that we've developed. We don't know or haven't tested what the impact of many of those are on human beings. And one of the biggest things that we've not been very good about is we'll say, okay, you can have this level of this one, and you can have this level of that one, and you can have this level of that one, but what about the cocktail, right? It's kind of like, if you were a college fraternity person, you ever hear the thing called a hairy buffalo? They put out a trash can, and everybody brings whatever they have, a bottle of beer, a bottle of liquor, some cheap-ass wine, whatever. We all pour it into the thing, and then you drink it. Or maybe you make the pledges drink it, Okay? Well, in some sense, that's what we're doing right now to our atmosphere with all these things, right? It's one big hairy buffalo. Finally, third, reduce and eventually eliminate our contributions to the ongoing physical degradation of nature. We want to move from inefficient use of land resources to efficient use of land and resources, ones that are ecologically being taken care of. For example, the Forest Stewardship Council is a great example of moving in that direction. Good things are happening there. Resources from poorly managed ecosystems to resources from well-managed ecosystems. Efficiency and sustainable management. And then finally, we want to reduce and eventually eliminate our contributions to the conditions that systematically undermine people's abilities to meet their own needs. Notice this doesn't say meet people's needs. It means get the barriers out of the way that allow them to meet their own needs. This is not about a handout. This is about giving them the opportunity to take care of themselves and getting out of the way of that. So from unsafe and unhealthy production and use to safe and healthy production and use of products, materials, and things. From practices and systems that violate human rights to those that show respect for human rights. From economic barriers that don't give people the opportunity to create what they need to educate, feed, clothe, shelter themselves, to those that are sufficient resources for livelihood. This is what I sometimes refer to as the elusive fourth condition. Because usually when we talk about sustainability, first of all, everybody goes to this idea of green and environment, and very often don't think so much about the social component. And a lot of times it's easy to get people to buy into the first four, the environmental ones, but when you start talking about the social component, that can be a much greater challenge for all of us. So to help us think a little bit about that, we just kind of want to delve a little bit more into this. And that is to sort of recognize, what do we mean by human needs? Usually when we talk about human needs, what we tend to do is we tend to sort of think, well, human needs aren't being met, that those poor people in countries unlike ours or in ghettos that we never go through, or most of us don't go through. But the point that we're trying to make here is that actually human needs are much broader than that. And one of the things we need to do to sort of maybe understand and embrace and recognize how important the social condition is for ourselves, not just for anybody else, is to recognize how broad it is. And with that, we pull upon some of the work by a guy by the name of Fred Max Neef. He's an economist that we don't have in the room, and a social developmental sociologist out of South America. He's been working on these issues, developed something called human scale development. And what he argues is that human needs are fundamental, finite, few, and classifiable. And they are the same in all cultures across time. Now, this isn't to say that the way we satisfy those are different. So he's not saying that everybody has the same needs to be satisfied in the same way. He's saying we all share a common set of needs. For example, we all need oxygen, right? But how we satisfy those needs, that changes. And the needs that he's identified are subsistence, idleness, participation, protection, affection, understanding, creativity, identity, and freedom. We tend to focus on things like subsistence. And so we'd say, well, we don't really have any human needs in our affluent society. But if we start talking about things like affection, things like protection, the ability to walk across a parking lot at night if you're a female, identity, to love who you want to love, other kinds of issues, participation, to have an impact on decisions that are being made, that's affecting your communities. Then you can begin to see that we all have certain areas where our human needs are being met and other areas where our human needs are not being met. And one of what we call those proxy indicators that, in fact, affluent societies are having human needs are not being met might be things like rates of alcohol and drug and substance abuse, rates of violence. Those things might be proxy indicators that, in fact, there are some human needs that we need to be working on as well. And we can learn from each other whether we are more affluent or less affluent. So the idea here is what changes is not the needs, but the satisfiers. And depending on how we satisfy these needs, that's going to have a huge impact on those other three components of the environmental conditions of sustainability. We can satisfy these needs in ways that are in harmony with the environment and with sustainability, the principles of sustainability, or we can satisfy these needs through a kind of rampant consumption and use of natural resources and creation of man-made materials that have no sensibility about the impact going forward and what kind of damage it might do for us to maintain a balanced system that can be passed on from one generation to the next into that millennial hope that David Orr talks about. So here's an example of different ways that we might meet the needs of subsistence, to give us an idea. We all have that need, right? But some of it will, meet it by microwave. Some of you maybe just met your needs for subsistence by hitting the nearest fast food joint. I doubt if anybody was hunting and gathering for their own, or probably didn't grow anything recently. Although if you went to the right place at the Greenfield, you might have gotten some locally grown produce. There's a lot of it here in South Bend. So this gives us an idea, just a little bit of a run through the needs component, and helps us recognize that when we're talking about sustainability, we're not just talking about sort of traditional, narrowly conceived green or environmentalism. We're talking truly about that triple bottom line of environment, economy, and society. And if we don't get them all together, we're not going to be able to get any one of them. If people are not able to meet their needs, we're going to see a situation where either we go to what's called fast or pseudo-satisfiers, false or pseudo-satisfiers, where we consume, and in some attempt to satisfy this unquenchable need that is just causing us to overuse the materials available for us in our ecosystem, or we are so poor and impoverished that we will cut down anything or have knife fights over wood in order to just keep ourselves warm. So on either end of the scale, our inability to satisfy these human needs, if we can't figure out a way to do that and stop putting barriers up for that, then we're not going to be able to solve the other problem. And vice versa, too. If you don't have a healthy, balanced ecosystem, you're not going to be able to satisfy human needs. They are all integrated. So there's what we call our Alpen Manual for the Planet. And the wonderful thing about this is that you can go into the science, it's there, you can use it for research, you can use it for teaching, you can use it for service and civic engagement, but you don't have to understand it to work it. It's like your laptop or your car. I do not know how that laptop works. Some of you in this room maybe do or even help develop it, but I can use it. And these days, I don't even understand my car. You know, I used to be able to change the oil and set the timing. I can't do that. That dates me. But I know how to drive it. And it's the same thing with this. Even if you don't understand these principles, you can put them into practice and make a difference. Now, in addition to having or knowing what we might be able to do, that's not enough. Because as the philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach said, it's not enough to know the answer. You also got to be able to put it into practice. And that's the problem. You know, we've got the information, knowledge we need. How do you put it into practice? And in order to sort of think about that, one of the things that the folks at the Natural Step began to do is take a look at some of the work of, first of all, the system thinking approach, but also the work of Peter Senge, who started out as a organizational effectiveness and productivity guru, eventually has merged that with sustainability. But Senge's basic point is this. We live in a world that is so complex now, whether you're talking about running a global corporation or whether you're talking about trying to deal with the issues of sustainability, that we cannot afford to waste a single neuron of anybody in any of our organizations. From the person who might be in the CEO's office, where maybe the neurons are perhaps most, I won't go there, to the person down working on the line. Now the question is, how do you get that to happen? And he says, well, you create what's called a learning organization. And he has something called the Institute for Learning Organizations and teaches people how to do this. But the idea is this. You find a simple set of principles that reflect what you want your organization to accomplish in its basic goals. You teach those to everybody in the organization, not just a person in the front office or in the CEO's office. You teach them to every single person, and then you set them loose to put those ideas into practice, each in their own realm. These days, we would start to call that distributed organization or distributed power in some kind of fashion. Well, it turns out that that's just what the Natural Step has put together, right? 4 basic principles you can teach anybody in an hour and a half or 2 hours that they can put into practice anywhere they're at. How many of you have been in a hotel recently? What's something you notice sustainability-wise when you walk into a hotel that's kind of a neat thing? Towels. What about the towels? You can choose not to have your room made up. And even if you're a Starwood member, which I am, you get 500 points. Or a free drink, I take the points. So, do you know where that idea came from? A company called Scandic Hotels in Northern Europe taught all their folks these basic principles I've just talked to you about and set them loose. And some people down in the washroom of one of their hotels said, you know what, we could save an awful lot of water and chemicals and other stuff if we could get our clients not to have things washed every day. Let's try it. So they sent the idea up the chain, they tried it, it worked out, and those people in that washroom have changed the way hotels work around the world. That's the power of this kind of an approach. And that's the kind of thing that also turns you from a pessimist to an optimist, because that's how we harness the power of human beings. The problem is, in organizations, we always have a problem doing this. We all do this by ourselves naturally. Every one of you here who's planning, how many here are hoping to get a degree sometime in the next 2 to 4 years? Raise your hands. Every one of you have backcasted. How many of you here are hoping to get promotion to full professor sometime in the next 5 to 10 years? Raise your hands. Every one of you have backcasted, because what have you done? You have visioned the future you want. And then you've come back to the present to talk about how you're going to move forward. Our problem is typically we get caught up in all these things and we don't take a look at the whole system. So we sort of focus on forecasting, we sort of take a look at the way things have been going, and then we just say, well, we're just going to keep on doing it a little bit better. Well, if we're headed in the wrong direction or what we're doing is not working, doing a little bit better is not going to help us. How do we change? How do we free ourselves from the tyrannies of the past and the inertias of the present? Well, one of the ways is to move from forecasting to backcasting. Here what you do is you do what we all do as individuals. We have that goal in mind. We figure out what that goal is. Then we come back to the present and we start moving towards it one step at a time. And if we've got that goal, then we get it. And what we can do is we can take those sustainability principles, use those to create a compelling vision, and then we can move back to the present and start to move forward one step at a time. And if we have a framework that we share, we also know that we can be on the same page. And again, this is something we can do at the university. We can begin to use this framework to help us think about how we teach and what we teach. We can use it to think about how we research and where we research as a platform for those of us who want to do research in this area. We can think about how we serve and how we engage. Another process we can use is called the ABCD method, where you start out by awareness. Become aware of what are the system conditions of sustainability. That's what we're doing here right now, and you can do this in a couple of hours. Once you do that, then you begin to say, okay, what is our baseline? Where are we doing things that are assets? What sustainability assets do we have where we can actually talk about things we're already doing right? For example, game day recycling at Notre Dame, one of the top game day recycling programs in the country, run by Miles Robertson right there, our first graduate in the minor in sustainability at USB, so yay Miles. But that's an example. That's an asset for Notre Dame. The Office of Sustainability, Linda up there is running that. That's an asset. Jessica and the work that this committee is doing, that's an asset. But there's also system condition violations. There's a coal plant out there. That's helping to bring up materials from the Earth's core faster than it can be reabsorbed. That's a violation. Okay, put that in the violation committee. Do we get rid of it overnight? No. Would we like to have it gone by 2030 or 2050? Maybe we can do that. Perhaps moving through natural gas in the meantime. Come up with your vision, decide on priorities, and then once you've got your priorities figured out, then you ask these questions. Does it move us in the right direction? In other words, does the action we're putting into place move us towards that vision? Is it a flexible platform? We don't want to spend a lot of money on something that is a dead end that says, okay, we get a quick fix now, but 15 years down the line, we just threw $1 million or $2 million down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden we got to start with something else. Let's try to do things where, maybe don't take the step that's quite so big. Take a smaller one, perhaps, because it'll allow us to move further rather than take us too far off track. And is it a good turn on reinvestment? Remember, when we're talking about sustainability, it's not just about being ecologically friendly, it's also about being economically sound. We have to talk about the return on investment, both in terms of money and in terms of time. Quite frankly, time for many of us is our most valuable asset. For many organizations, time is our most valuable asset. So what we would suggest is that this framework for sustainable strategic development is one platform that can allow us to begin to bring the academic mission and the pursuit of sustainability together. It allows us to integrate trying to bring into harmony economy, society, environment with teaching, research, and service. The potential that I see for this, and my colleague Krista Bailey, who I've been working with on developing these ideas, is that it provides us with a peer-reviewed platform for our mission activities, and I think that's absolutely crucial. There's a lot of things out there that are lists of things we ought to do or basic principles, but the question is, can we track those down into our teaching, research, and service? It allows us to collaborate across boundaries in terms of teaching, research, and service. It allows us to collaborate across disciplines, across the area of grants and development, the academic and non-academic side. What's great about this is if we do this, our campuses become a laboratory. Our food service people and our grounds people can become teachers that our students can learn from if we think about this. Campus and community, we work very much together, hand in glove with campus and community. It allows us to break those breakdowns. It allows us to collaborate with education, business, government, not-for-profit. It gets the system in the room, and that's the problem. We've got to get all of the components of the system in the room. One place you can go for help to do that, particularly on the academic side, is what's called the Alliance for Strategic Development. This is a group of different universities that are involved in working with the framework and putting it into practice in various kinds of research and consulting and teaching projects. And also, if you go onto their website, you'll see there you can connect to the reference list, and there's a whole set of studies, PhD dissertations, and work over the last 20, 25 years that have been done that you can use as a platform for your own work and your own teaching. In terms of sustainability, universities, as Michael Crow says, we only might be 3% of the carbon footprint, but we have 100% of the educational footprint. And to date, more than 650 schools that educate more than 5.5 million students have pledged to integrate sustainability into their educational experience through the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. Some of you are also familiar with ASHE, the American Association for Sustainability in Higher Education, a terrific resource to help in the universities. One university has done this in particular, the University of Toronto, and they've actually used this framework to sort of take a look at that backcasting ABCD method and move through that process to take a look at it and integrate it into their strategic planning across all sectors of the university. They've gone through and say, you know, if we take a look at our own funnel, we've got competition costs, shortages of raw materials, and expenses all, you know, challenging us. They're closing the funnel. We've got consumer pressure for more environmentally concerned citizens and students. A recent study showed from one of the major food service companies showed that somewhere around 60% of students take the sustainability portfolio of a college or university into account when they're making a decision where to go. So do employers. So do the students, not only looking for their colleges, but when they're looking for a place to work, they're also looking for this as well. If you want the best and brightest, this will help you out. Regulations are changing, demands for transparency, increased competition for the best employees, all of these things, you know, Toronto saw as challenges, and they began to move into sustainability to help move that out. At the Center for a Sustainable Future, we have been using this as a platform for all of our activities. And so it might not be obvious, but we are doing our teaching and learning. We have a minor in sustainability studies. We've got a graduate certificate in strategic sustainable leadership coming out in the spring, and we're working on a major right now. In terms of research, we've got a faculty member who's doing research on allotment gardens, some on ecology. We ourselves are doing research on the elusive fourth condition. We also engage fellows who are doing applied research in the community, and they do stuff with us as well. And then in terms of service and civic engagement, we're regularly doing workshops with the community. We have a network of 600 sustainability folks around the area here. It's called the Michiana Sustainable Community Economic Development Network. We're working with municipalities and local companies. So we're doing all of this kind of work with everybody. And that platform allows us to do that. So with that, I can take maybe one or two questions, and then we got to move things on.
One question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm Ann Doherty from Xavier University.
Okay.
And I thank you for this because the times I've heard Dr. Robert speak, he starts by telling the story as a cancer children's doctor of the effect of telling these parents that their children are not going to live to be adults, and what are they willing to change in their own lifestyles that would have changed their children's life. I think that's where backcasting came from. Can you tie in the reason he started this a little bit with everything we heard yesterday, the imagination and the spiritual component that's the basis of this?
Well, I think for him, basically, the individual case of a child with cancer, you know, he just began to recognize that that's in some sense a metaphor for perhaps an analogy, even more powerfully, of what we're experiencing right now. That, you know, there's a sensibility in which our own activities, almost in a Frankensteinish fashion, you know, are coming back to undermine not only ours, but all the other species we share this planet with in that way. I don't know about his spiritual component. I don't know what his spiritual background is or isn't. I do know that this is a scientific platform, but I also know that it works well with a faith background. For example, one can see that what science allows us to do is allows us, if we have a faith, to understand that greater power's workings, if you want to put it that way. But it also works for people who might not have faith, you know, who would be able to say, okay, this is how nature works. But regardless of where you're coming from, it helps us understand how the system that we're living in, and it actually can be a platform of cooperation. And that's one of the things that Robert was most interested in. He saw everybody arguing about how hot is it going to be in 2050? Is global warming happening this fast or this not? Are the sea levels going to raise 3 feet, 4 feet, or 5 feet? And they spent all their time doing that, arguing, you know, did God form the earth? Was it formed by evolution? They don't get anything done. He says, look, rather than getting caught up in those big questions, we can focus on some specific things that we agree on, and we can move forward on one step at a time. And in the evenings, when we're out having a beer, we can talk about these other issues. But let's not get caught up in our day jobs, in our job of trying to create a sustainable future. Let's figure out some basic things we can do, and we start one step at a time. Again, just think about those people in that hotel basement in Scandic Hotels. they change the world a little bit. And enough people around the world doing that. And as I said at the beginning of this talk, there are 30 people I know right now within 30 miles of this point are making similar impacts. And we could put that point down anywhere in the world, draw a 30-mile thing around it, and you're going to find a similar density of people doing that. We're not unique. One last thing, and then I'll close and thank you all. For those of you who do get pessimistic, and you do get sort of doom and gloom, because I used to do the doom and gloom thing for 20 years, but it just sort of undermines people willing to move forward. Did get their attention, but now we need to move forward. And that is, take a look at Paul Hawken's Blessed Unrest. Just Google it. Paul Hawken basically found out that there's somewhere between 10 to 100 million people in well over 100,000 organizations that are working in ones, in twos, in 50s, and hundreds and thousands, addressing these issues. He says it's the greatest social movement in the world that nobody really knows about. And when you see that, and when you see the people in this room, and when you meet the people I work with on a daily basis, you have hope that we can make a difference. Thank you very much.